Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Stay tuned to see how this contract marriage evolves and whether love will bloom in the most unexpected of places. Stay tuned to see how this contract marriage evolves and whether love will bloom in the most unexpected of places. Mark walked through the grand gates of Eleanor's estate, the towering columns of the mansion looming before him, casting a shadow over his already heavy heart. He still couldn't believe he had agreed to this. The cold, rainy day had turned into a chilly evening, and as he stepped out of the car, his feet crunched on the gravel pathway. His mind replayed the events of the day, signing the papers, the sterile courthouse ceremony, the brief and emotionless vows they exchanged. It felt unreal. He had just entered a new world, one he wasn't sure he belonged in. But the mansion, with its pristine stone facade and impeccable gardens, felt like a place where he'd never truly fit in. Inside, the silence was almost deafening, except for the faint echo of Eleanor's footsteps ahead of him. He followed her inside, where the warmth of the large foyer was almost too much to bear after the cold outside. The house was beautifully decorated, but it felt empty. Cold, almost lifeless. Eleanor led him to a room with towering windows that overlooked the perfectly manicured grounds. Mark's stomach churned at the thought of what he had gotten himself into. "Here's your room," Eleanor said, her voice smooth and impersonal as she handed him the keys. She turned to leave without another word, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Mark stared at the key in his hand, feeling more like a stranger in someone else's life than ever before. He had always dreamed of a better life, but now that it was in his hands, it felt like a cage. The room she had given him was luxurious, of course, a king-sized bed, antique furniture, velvet curtains, but it lacked warmth. There was no personal touch, no sign of life. Just a perfectly crafted space that didn't belong to him. The room was a reflection of the mansion, beautiful, yet empty. He sat down on the edge of the bed, feeling overwhelmed. His entire life had just changed, but he still felt like the same person, lost, confused, and unsure of where he was headed. The next morning, Eleanor had arranged for a personal stylist to give him a makeover, to fit the image of her new husband. Mark had never been the type to care much about appearances, but today, he let himself be guided. As the stylist worked, transforming his look with a tailored suit and perfectly combed hair, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he was playing a part in someone else's life. He barely recognized himself in the mirror. His reflection felt distant, like a version of him that didn't quite fit. Later that afternoon, Eleanor invited him to a charity gala, one of the many events she attended to maintain her public image. He was nervous. He had no idea how to behave in this world of luxury and wealth, a world so different from the one he had come from. He had grown up in a small town, with modest means. The closest he had come to a gala was watching them on TV. Now, here he was, standing beside Eleanor in the grand ballroom, surrounded by people who seemed to have it all. He tried to smile, to play his part, but inside, he felt like an imposter. As the night went on, Mark couldn't help but notice how cold and distant Eleanor seemed. She moved through the crowd with ease, exchanging pleasantries, shaking hands, and smiling in all the right places. But whenever she glanced at him, her eyes were emotionless, almost calculating. It was as if he were just another accessory in her carefully curated life. He had no idea what to expect from this marriage, but he had hoped for something more than this. Was she truly as indifferent as she seemed, or was it all part of the deal? Despite the coldness in the air, Mark couldn't help but wonder what might happen next. He was bound to Eleanor by a contract, but as the evening wore on, he began to feel a small seed of doubt sprout in his mind. Was this all just about money and status for her? Or was there something more to this arrangement? For the first time, he considered the possibility that Eleanor, despite her icy demeanor, might have her own struggles, her own loneliness. After all, no one could live in such a large house, surrounded by so much wealth, without something missing. As they left the gala, Eleanor was once again distant, her eyes fixed on the crowd ahead of her. Mark tried to speak to her, to ask her what she truly wanted from this marriage, but she only gave him a polite smile, as if their entire conversation was nothing more than a transaction. When they reached the car, Eleanor's assistant opened the door for them. As they drove through the quiet streets, Mark looked out the window, lost in thought. What had he really signed up for? Was this just a marriage of convenience for her? Or could it be the beginning of something more? His heart was full of questions, but he couldn't find the answers. He felt more alone than ever, despite being surrounded by wealth and luxury. The following days were a blur of events, gala after gala, meetings with business partners, and more time spent in the luxurious house. Eleanor kept herself busy with her own life, and Mark, unsure of what else to do, began to explore the mansion. The grand staircase, the library with shelves upon shelves of books he would never have the time to read, the dining room where meals were served in silence. Every room felt like a different world, one that he didn't belong to. But as he spent more time in the house, he started to notice small things that made him wonder if there was more to Eleanor's cold exterior. Sometimes, when they were alone, she would let her guard down just a little and he would catch a glimpse of something else beneath the surface. Was she really as emotionally detached as she appeared? Or was there a deeper connection between them that neither of them had yet discovered? Stay tuned to see how this contract marriage begins to unravel and whether love will find its way into this complex arrangement. Days passed, and Mark's life in the mansion began to feel more like a routine. Eleanor kept herself busy with meetings, gala events, and business deals, while Mark spent most of his time in the house, trying to find his place in this world of luxury. He spent hours in the expansive library, reading through books he never had time for before. The quiet, sterile silence of the mansion had begun to feel like a prison, with every hallway echoing the distance between them. Eleanor was polite, but distant, and Mark couldn't help but wonder if he was just another pawn in her well-constructed world. Every day, he tried to engage with her, but she remained emotionally aloof, her focus always on her work. One evening, as Mark wandered the mansion, he stumbled across a room he had not yet explored. It was a private study, tucked away at the far end of the house, filled with old books, art, and personal photographs. As he walked around, he noticed one photograph on the wall, a picture of a younger Eleanor, smiling warmly with a man by her side. There was an intimacy in the photo that caught Mark's attention. Who was the man? Was he someone important to Eleanor? The thought lingered in his mind as he made his way back to his room, a sense of unease settling in his chest. The next day, during breakfast, he decided to ask her about the photo. I saw the picture in your study, Mark began hesitantly, his eyes searching hers for some sign of recognition. Who was the man in the photo with you? Eleanor looked up from her coffee, her expression unreadable. For a moment, she seemed caught off guard by the question. She set her cup down slowly, her gaze drifting for a second before she answered. He was someone I used to be close to. But that was a long time ago. Her tone was flat, emotionless, and the subject seemed to be closed. Mark wanted to press further, to understand what had happened between them, but he held back, not wanting to push her. Instead, he nodded, sensing that she wasn't ready to share more. Despite the coldness in her response, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor had a past she was hiding, a past she refused to talk about. Days turned into weeks, and the routine continued. Eleanor remained the same, distant, detached, and focused on her work. Mark, however, found himself struggling more with the emptiness of their arrangement. He began to question his own role in this marriage. Was it really just about the contract? Or was there something deeper, something he had missed along the way? One evening, Eleanor invited him to join her at an art gala she was hosting for charity. Mark was hesitant at first, knowing that these events always felt like a world he didn't belong to. But he agreed, not wanting to seem uninterested. As they arrived at the gala, Mark felt the familiar pang of discomfort. The glittering lights, the well-dressed guests, and the constant buzz of conversation made him feel small and insignificant. Eleanor, on the other hand, moved through the crowd with ease, greeting everyone with a practiced smile, her demeanor polished and perfect. Mark felt like an outsider once again, unsure of how to act, where to stand, or what to say. But then something unexpected happened. As he stood off to the side, watching Eleanor speak with a group of business associates, a voice interrupted his thoughts. "You're Eleanor's husband, right?" Mark turned to see a woman standing beside him. She was elegant, with a sharp gaze and a confident air about her. "I've heard so much about you," she said with a smile. Mark nodded awkwardly, unsure of how to respond. "I'm Mark. Nice to meet you." The woman's smile widened, but there was something almost calculating in her eyes. "Eleanor's a very impressive woman," she said, her tone lowering slightly. "But be careful, Mark. People like her don't let anyone in easily." Mark felt a chill run down his spine as the woman walked away, her words lingering in his mind. Was she warning him? Or was it just idle gossip? He turned to look for Eleanor, but she was lost in conversation once again, oblivious to his discomfort. As the night wore on, Mark couldn't help but feel the weight of the woman's words. Was Eleanor truly as cold and detached as she seemed? Or was there something more beneath the surface that he hadn't yet uncovered? He didn't know what to believe anymore. The night ended, and they returned to the mansion in silence, the tension between them thick in the air. Eleanor didn't say much during the drive home, lost in her own thoughts. Mark, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He thought back to the woman at the gala and her cryptic warning. Had he married into a world of secrets? As the car pulled into the driveway, Mark knew that things were about to change. The questions that had been swirling in his mind were growing louder, and he needed answers. What was Eleanor hiding? And more importantly, what was he really doing here? Stay tuned to see what secrets will be revealed and whether Mark and Eleanor's marriage will evolve into something more. The following day, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The gala had been the tipping point, his mind still swirling with the woman's words, "Be careful, Mark. People like her don't let anyone in easily." What did she mean by that? Was Eleanor hiding something deeper, something darker? Mark felt more isolated than ever in the mansion, surrounded by luxury, yet emotionally distant from the woman he was now legally bound to. He spent most of the morning walking through the large, empty halls, trying to shake off the growing unease. Eleanor was busy again, tied up in her meetings, leaving him alone with his thoughts. As much as he had tried to bury his doubts, the questions continued to haunt him. What was Eleanor really like? What was she hiding behind her cold facade? The next evening, as the mansion settled into the quiet of the night, Mark made a decision. He couldn't keep ignoring the gut feeling he had. He needed answers. Eleanor's secrets were becoming harder to ignore, and he had a sinking feeling that they were about to collide in ways neither of them would be prepared for. Mark quietly slipped into Eleanor's private study, the one with the photograph of the man from her past. The room was just as pristine as the rest of the mansion, untouched by time or emotion. He walked over to the desk, his fingers brushing against the smooth surface as he glanced at the photograph again. His curiosity got the better of him, and he opened one of the drawers, his eyes scanning the contents: papers, files, and then a small, leather-bound journal. Mark hesitated. It felt like an invasion of privacy, but the need to understand her, to piece together the woman he had married, was stronger than his guilt. He opened the journal carefully, flipping through the pages, each one filled with neat handwriting. As he read, his heart sank. The entries detailed a person he barely recognized, a woman torn between her business empire and the personal sacrifices she had made along the way. The more he read, the clearer it became that Eleanor had been through a lot in her past, much more than she had ever let on. One particular entry caught his attention, written years ago: "I've given everything to my company. But what happens when there's no one left to share it with? I wonder if I'll ever find someone who can see me for who I really am, not just for the woman behind the money." The words were raw, vulnerable, and they painted a picture of Eleanor he had never seen before. Mark's heart softened. He had assumed she was cold and indifferent, but this journal revealed a side of her that was anything but. Eleanor was a woman who had sacrificed so much in pursuit of her career, perhaps at the expense of her own happiness. It was clear that she had been hurt in the past, and perhaps, just perhaps, her emotional distance was a defense mechanism. Mark closed the journal and carefully placed it back in the drawer. He couldn't help but feel a sense of empathy for Eleanor, but the question still lingered: why hadn't she shared this side of herself with him? Why had she kept it hidden behind her wall of professionalism? The next morning, Mark found himself sitting across from Eleanor at breakfast. She was reading through documents, her usual calm demeanor in place, but today, Mark could see a hint of weariness in her eyes. The tension between them had been building for weeks, and now, he couldn't ignore it any longer. "Eleanor," he said softly, his voice steady. "I found something yesterday. In your study." Her eyes flicked up from the papers, a flash of surprise crossing her face before she quickly masked it. "What did you find?" she asked, her tone cool but guarded. Mark hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I found your journal," he said quietly. Eleanor froze, her face momentarily going pale. "You shouldn't have gone through my things, Mark," she said, her voice low. Mark wasn't sure if it was the shock of her reaction or the sudden vulnerability in her eyes, but he pressed on. "I wasn't trying to invade your privacy, but I need to understand you, Eleanor. I need to know the person I've married, not just the businesswoman I see at these events." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence in the room was deafening, and Mark could feel the weight of the unspoken words hanging between them. Finally, Eleanor set her papers down and sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "You want to know who I really am?" she asked, her voice softening. "I'm a woman who has spent her life building something that doesn't even feel like mine anymore. A woman who's been afraid to let anyone in, because letting them in means exposing my vulnerabilities. I thought I could do everything on my own, that I could protect myself by hiding behind this perfect image." Mark's heart ached for her. He had never realized just how much pain she had been hiding beneath her composed exterior. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, the words feeling inadequate, but they were all he could offer in that moment. Eleanor looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "You don't have to apologize. I've been trying to protect myself from the world, but in doing so, I've pushed away the one person who might actually be able to help me heal." Mark reached out, his hand resting gently on hers. "I don't want to just be your husband in name, Eleanor. I want to be here for you, for all of you." There was a long pause, and for the first time since they had married, Eleanor looked at him not as her business partner, not as the man she had married out of convenience, but as someone who truly saw her. "I think," she whispered, "I might have made the biggest mistake of my life by pushing you away." Stay tuned to see if Mark and Eleanor can overcome their emotional barriers and find a real connection in their contract marriage. The next few days felt different. Eleanor and Mark's interactions became less formal, less distant. The emotional walls that had kept them apart began to slowly crumble, brick by brick. Eleanor still had her guarded moments, but there were moments of honesty between them that felt genuine. Mark could see it in her eyes, the vulnerability she had long hidden, and it made him want to understand her even more. He had never thought he would be in this position, in a marriage that was supposed to be a business transaction, but now, he couldn't help but feel that there was more at play here. He had never imagined that he might actually fall for her, that the walls she had built around herself might one day come down. One evening, as they sat together in the study, Mark finally felt the courage to ask her more about her past. "Eleanor," he began gently, "I know you've been through a lot, and I respect your privacy. But I feel like I'm only seeing part of you, the part that's been hidden behind this businesswoman persona. What happened between you and the man in that photo?" Eleanor's hand froze mid-motion as she reached for a glass of wine, her gaze briefly drifting to the photograph of her younger self. The smile on her face was a stark contrast to the woman she was now. She set the glass down with a soft sigh, her eyes locking onto his. For a moment, the room felt heavier, as if the weight of her past was bearing down on both of them. "He was the love of my life, Mark," Eleanor said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I pushed him away because of my career. I thought I had to choose between love and success, and I chose success. It was a mistake I'll never be able to undo." Mark listened carefully, his heart aching for her. He had always seen Eleanor as the woman who had everything: wealth, power, control, but he never realized the sacrifices she had made to get there. I didn't want to be vulnerable, she continued, her voice trembling slightly. I thought that if I opened up to him, if I let him in, I'd lose everything I had worked for. So I shut him out, and I've lived with that regret ever since. Mark's heart went out to her. He had been so quick to judge her coldness, but now, he could see that it was a shield, a way to protect herself from the pain of her past. Eleanor, you don't have to keep pushing people away, Mark said softly, his hand reaching for hers. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Her eyes met his, searching for something. She seemed to consider his words for a long time before she finally nodded. Maybe I've been too afraid to admit it, she said, her voice barely audible. But I think I've been looking for someone like you all along. Someone who could see through all the walls I've built. In the days that followed, things between them began to shift in ways neither of them had expected. Eleanor still focused on her business, but she made time for Mark, really made time. They shared meals together, talked about things other than work, and for the first time, Mark felt like he was getting to know the real Eleanor. One afternoon, as they walked through the sprawling gardens of the estate, Eleanor turned to him, her face lit by the soft glow of the afternoon sun. Mark, she said, I've been thinking a lot about what we've been through, and I think I'm ready to make some changes. I don't want this marriage to be just a contract anymore. I want it to mean something. I want us to build something real. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, Mark wasn't sure if he was hearing her correctly. This wasn't just about their financial arrangement anymore. She was opening up to the possibility of something deeper, something genuine. Mark took her hand, his heart racing. I've always wanted that too, he said, his voice full of emotion. I didn't know what to expect when I signed that contract, but now I'm starting to believe that maybe this could work. Maybe we can build a life together. Eleanor smiled, the warmth in her eyes brighter than it had ever been. I hope so, Mark, she said softly. I really hope so. Their days together began to take on a new light. Eleanor was still the powerful woman who ran a vast empire, but now she was also someone who was allowing herself to be vulnerable, to let someone else in. And Mark, who had entered this marriage with little more than financial necessity, was beginning to fall for her in a way he hadn't expected. He had always admired her strength, but now he saw the woman behind that strength, someone who was capable of love, someone who needed him as much as he needed her. One evening, as they sat on the terrace, watching the sun set over the horizon, Mark looked at Eleanor with a newfound sense of admiration. I never imagined this, Eleanor, he said, his voice filled with awe. I never imagined that a contract could turn into something like this. Something real. She turned to him, her smile soft and genuine. Neither did I, Mark, she said, but I'm glad it has. As the days turned into weeks, Mark and Eleanor began to see the possibilities in their marriage, possibilities they hadn't considered when they first met. The more they opened up to each other, the more they realized that their contract wasn't just about business, it was about building a future, together. Stay tuned to see how Mark and Eleanor's evolving relationship faces new challenges, and whether they can truly find happiness in each other's arms. As weeks passed, Mark and Eleanor continued to grow closer, their relationship evolving in ways neither of them had anticipated. The barriers they had once built between them, both emotional and physical, began to break down. Eleanor was no longer just the stoic businesswoman, she was becoming more human, more vulnerable with Mark. And Mark, who had come into this marriage with a heart full of questions and doubts, was finding a deeper connection with her than he ever imagined possible. They spent their days together, working on her business, but also finding quiet moments to share. It wasn't all perfect, there were still moments of tension, moments when the weight of their pasts threatened to pull them apart. But they were learning to navigate those moments, growing stronger as a couple. One afternoon, Eleanor asked Mark to accompany her to a meeting with her board of directors. Mark had always felt like an outsider at these events, but this time, something was different. He felt more confident, more sure of his place in her life. As they entered the conference room, Eleanor gave him a subtle smile, one that made him feel like he truly belonged. During the meeting, Eleanor was as poised and professional as ever, but Mark couldn't help but notice the small glances they exchanged, the subtle touches when no one was looking. It was as if the world outside them had faded away, and for once, it was just the two of them working together, not as business partners or a contract marriage, but as something more. After the meeting, as they walked through the lobby, Eleanor turned to Mark, her expression softer than usual. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice quiet. "About us. About everything." Mark looked at her, his heart beating faster. "What about us?" he asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. Eleanor took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his. "I know we started this marriage as a business arrangement. But it's becoming something else. Something more real than I ever expected. And I think I'm starting to love you, Mark." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Mark's heart raced as he processed what she had just said. He had always known that there was something there, something between them, but to hear her say it out loud it was overwhelming. He reached for her hand, his fingers trembling slightly. "Eleanor," he said softly, "I love you too. I think I've loved you for longer than I realized. This marriage was never just about the contract for me. It was about you. All along." Eleanor's eyes filled with emotion, and for the first time, Mark saw the true depth of her feelings. They had both been afraid to admit what was happening between them, but now it was clear they were no longer just bound by a contract. They were bound by something much stronger, something real. The days that followed were filled with a new sense of possibility. Eleanor and Mark began to dream about their future together, not just as husband and wife, but as partners in every sense of the word. They made plans to travel, to build a life that was not defined by business or financial arrangements, but by the love they were learning to share. But as their relationship deepened, so did the challenges. Eleanor's past was never far from her mind, and she still carried the weight of the choices she had made. She had hurt people in the past, and though Mark had seen a softer side of her, he knew that she still had a long road to travel before she could truly let go of the pain she had been carrying. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, Eleanor opened up about her fears. "Mark, I don't know if I'm ready for everything that comes with love," she admitted. "I've spent so many years building this wall around me, keeping everyone out. I'm afraid that if I let you in completely, I'll lose everything. My career, my independence. I don't want to lose myself in this." Mark reached for her hand, his voice steady and reassuring. "Eleanor, you don't have to lose yourself. I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm here to support you, to stand by your side. We can build something together, but it doesn't have to be at the cost of who you are." She looked at him, tears brimming in her eyes. "You make it sound so easy," she whispered. "But I've spent my whole life pushing people away. And now, I don't know how to stop." Mark squeezed her hand gently. "You don't have to stop. Just take it one step at a time. We don't have to have everything figured out right now. We have time. We have each other." For the first time in a long while, Eleanor allowed herself to lean into Mark's embrace. She didn't have all the answers, and neither did he, but together, they were starting to build something beautiful. They didn't need to rush. The journey ahead was theirs to navigate, one step at a time. Stay tuned to see how Mark and Eleanor's relationship continues to evolve, as they face new challenges and discover what it truly means to love and trust each other. Days passed, and Eleanor and Mark's relationship continued to deepen, but with each step forward, new challenges seemed to emerge. Eleanor's emotional walls were slowly coming down, but the scars from her past remained. It was clear to Mark that while she was ready to embrace their future, she was still struggling with the guilt and fear that had shaped so much of her life. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, enjoying the peaceful silence, Eleanor turned to him, her expression unusually serious. "Mark," she began, her voice soft, "I need to tell you something. Something I should have said much earlier." Mark looked at her, sensing the weight of her words. "What is it, Eleanor?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. She took a deep breath, her hands resting on her lap, as if gathering the courage to say the words that had been haunting her. Before we got married, I had an arrangement with someone, she said, her eyes not meeting his. A business arrangement. It was never meant to be anything personal, but I thought it was the only way to protect myself, to keep control of everything. I'm afraid it might come back to haunt us. Mark sat up straighter, his heart racing. What kind of arrangement? He asked, his voice a little tight with worry. Eleanor hesitated, clearly torn. I agreed to marry someone else, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. It was supposed to be a way to secure my business, to protect my company. But it never happened. I called it off, and I thought it was all behind me. Mark's heart sank, but he tried to keep his emotions in check. Why are you telling me this now? He asked, his voice calm but tinged with uncertainty. Eleanor finally looked up at him, her eyes filled with regret. Because I don't want you to find out from anyone else. I don't want you to think that I've been hiding something from you, even though I have. I should have been honest with you from the beginning. Mark was quiet for a moment, taking in her words. He could see the pain in her eyes, the vulnerability she had never allowed him to see before. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle and reassuring. Eleanor, you don't have to carry this burden alone, he said softly. We're in this together, remember? Whatever happened before, it doesn't change what we have now. I'm not going anywhere. Eleanor let out a shaky breath, her eyes brimming with tears. I've spent so much time building walls, Mark, she said, her voice cracking. I didn't know how to trust anyone, not even you. I was so afraid that if I let you in, I would lose everything I had worked for. I didn't want to make the same mistake again. Mark squeezed her hand gently. You don't have to be afraid anymore, he said, his voice filled with sincerity. I'm here for you, Eleanor. All of you. No matter what. Eleanor's tears began to fall, and Mark pulled her into an embrace, holding her tightly as she cried. In that moment, it was as if the last of her walls had crumbled, and she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her emotions. For the first time in years, she felt safe enough to let go, to release the pain she had been carrying for so long. As the days went by, things between them began to shift once more. Eleanor, though still guarded at times, began to open up more. She shared stories about her childhood, about the struggles she had faced to build her empire, and about the loneliness she had felt along the way. Mark listened, never interrupting, never judging, just there to support her. He knew that this was the woman he was meant to be with, the woman he had always wanted to understand. But despite their growing closeness, one final obstacle loomed over them, the looming threat of Eleanor's past business dealings. Though they had addressed the emotional walls, the shadow of her past still hung over them, threatening to tear them apart. One afternoon, as they sat in the living room, Mark turned to Eleanor, his face serious. What about the arrangement? He asked quietly. Is it really over? What happens if it comes back into the picture? Eleanor's face darkened, and for the first time, Mark saw the fear that had been buried deep inside her. I don't know, she admitted, her voice trembling. I thought it was over. I thought I had control over it. But there are people who won't let it go, Mark. People who are determined to see me fail. And if they find out about that arrangement, they'll use it against me, against us. Mark reached out, taking her hands in his. We'll face it together, Eleanor. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Eleanor looked at him, her eyes full of gratitude. She knew that she wasn't alone anymore. Together, they had come so far, and she believed that they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Thank you, Mark, she whispered, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. For everything. Mark smiled back, his heart swelling with love for her. There's no need to thank me, he said softly. I'm here for you, always. And for the first time in a long while, Eleanor believed him. She believed in them. And for the first time, she allowed herself to hope for a future filled with love, trust, and the promise of something real. Stay tuned to see what happens next, as Eleanor and Mark continue to navigate the complexities of their marriage, facing new challenges, but always together. As the days passed, Mark and Eleanor grew even closer, and their bond became stronger with each challenge they faced together. They had weathered the storm of their contract marriage, and now, they were beginning to build something real, something that neither of them had expected when they first met. The tension that once hung in the air between them was gone, replaced by a sense of mutual respect, understanding, and love. Yet, despite all the progress they had made, there was still one thing that weighed heavily on Eleanor's mind: the lingering threat from her past business dealings. Though she had tried to keep it buried, she knew that it wasn't something she could escape forever. She had made mistakes, and now, those mistakes were coming back to haunt her. One afternoon, as they sat in the living room, Eleanor's face was etched with worry. Mark could tell that something was troubling her. "Eleanor, what's going on?" he asked gently, his voice filled with concern. She looked up at him, her eyes clouded with anxiety. "I thought I could handle it," she said quietly. "But the truth is, there are people from my past who want to use my mistakes against me. They know about the business arrangement I had before we married, and they're threatening to expose it. If they do, it could ruin everything I've worked so hard for." Mark listened carefully, his heart heavy with understanding. He had known that Eleanor's past wasn't easy, but he hadn't realized just how much it was still affecting her. "We'll face it together," he said firmly, his voice filled with determination. "I'm not going anywhere. We'll figure this out, and we'll do it together." Eleanor looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. For the first time, she felt the weight of her past lighten, just a little. "I don't deserve you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You've stood by me through everything, and I've never been more afraid in my life." Mark reached out and took her hand, holding it gently in his. "You don't have to face this alone, Eleanor. I'm here for you, no matter what. We'll get through it, and we'll come out stronger on the other side." Eleanor's heart swelled with emotion as she looked at him. She had never known love like this, never known what it felt like to have someone by her side who truly understood her, who truly cared. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future one where she wasn't defined by her past mistakes, but by the love and trust she was building with Mark. The next few days were filled with tense meetings, phone calls, and a constant stream of uncertainty. But through it all, Eleanor and Mark remained united, facing every obstacle together. It wasn't easy, but they were learning to navigate the challenges that life threw their way, side by side. And slowly, the fear that had once dominated Eleanor's life began to fade. She was starting to trust again, not just Mark, but herself. As the days turned into weeks, Eleanor found herself opening up more to Mark, sharing things she had kept locked away for so long. She talked about her childhood, the pressure she had faced growing up, and the sacrifices she had made to build her empire. Mark listened with compassion, never judging her, always supporting her. And with every conversation, she felt the walls around her heart crumble even more. One evening, after another long day of meetings and phone calls, Eleanor and Mark sat together on the terrace, watching the sun set over the horizon. The golden light bathed them in warmth, and for the first time in a long while, Eleanor felt at peace. Mark turned to her, a soft smile on his lips. "Eleanor," he said, his voice full of tenderness, "I know things have been difficult, but I truly believe we're on the right path. You've come so far, and I'm proud of you." Eleanor looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. "Thank you, Mark," she whispered. "I don't think I could have gotten this far without you. You've shown me that love isn't about perfection, it's about acceptance. It's about being there for each other, no matter what." Mark reached out and took her hand, holding it tightly in his. "I'll always be here for you, Eleanor. No matter what happens, we'll face it together." The promise in his words was more than just a reassurance, it was a vow. And for the first time, Eleanor truly believed in it. She had spent so much of her life afraid of letting someone in, afraid of losing control, but now she was beginning to understand that true strength came from vulnerability, from allowing someone else to share in her life, her struggles, and her dreams. Together, they were building something real, something that couldn't be destroyed by the ghosts of the past. And for the first time, Eleanor felt a glimmer of hope for the future that was full of love, trust, and the promise of a life built on something solid and true. Stay tuned to see how Mark and Eleanor continue to navigate the complexities of their marriage, and whether they can overcome the final obstacles standing in the way of their happiness. As weeks went by, Eleanor and Mark continued to grow together in ways they had never imagined when they first entered their contract marriage. They had faced their fears, their doubts, and their pasts, and each day brought them closer to something real, something beyond the business arrangement that had initially brought them together. Their connection deepened, and the walls that Eleanor had so carefully constructed around her heart began to crumble. The business threats from her past were still there, lurking in the background, but they no longer felt like an insurmountable obstacle. Eleanor no longer carried the weight of her past alone. Mark was there, beside her, supporting her every step of the way. One evening, as they sat in the garden, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Eleanor looked at Mark with a sense of gratitude she hadn't known she was capable of. "Mark," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion, "I never thought I'd be here. I never thought I could feel this way, after everything that's happened. But here we are, and I'm starting to believe that love really does change everything." Mark smiled at her, his heart full. "Eleanor, I've never known a love like this. I never imagined that when I signed that contract, I'd be here, with you, building something real. It hasn't always been easy, but it's been worth it. You've shown me what it means to really care for someone." Eleanor squeezed his hand, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I was so afraid, Mark. I thought that if I let anyone in, I would lose everything. But now, I see that letting you in has given me everything I've ever needed." Mark wiped the tear from her cheek, his touch gentle. "You didn't lose anything, Eleanor. You gained something. You gained a partner, someone who will always stand by you. I will always be here for you, no matter what happens." As Eleanor looked at Mark, a wave of peace washed over her. She realized that she had been so focused on control, on building her empire, that she had forgotten what it meant to truly connect with someone. Now, with Mark by her side, she understood that love wasn't about perfection, it was about trust, support, and vulnerability. It was about two people building something together, no matter the obstacles. The next day, Eleanor made an announcement at one of her board meetings. She addressed the looming threats from her past and assured the board members that the situation was under control. With Mark's support, she had faced her fears head-on, and she felt empowered to take back control of her future. Her decision to address the issue publicly was a turning point not just for her career, but for their relationship. Eleanor had stopped hiding, stopped pretending to be someone she wasn't. And in doing so, she found strength in being vulnerable, in allowing herself to trust again. Mark stood by her every step of the way, never once wavering in his support. As they left the meeting, Eleanor turned to him with a smile. "We did it," she said softly. "We really did it." Mark kissed her forehead gently. "Together," he whispered, his voice filled with love. As the weeks turned into months, Eleanor and Mark's bond only grew stronger. They faced challenges together, celebrated victories together, and built a life filled with love, trust, and partnership. Their marriage, once built on a contract, had evolved into something far more beautiful, something real, something lasting. They had created a foundation for a future filled with promise, and though there would always be obstacles to face, Eleanor knew that as long as she had Mark by her side, she could face anything. With the love and support they had for each other, nothing seemed impossible. As the sun set on another day, Eleanor and Mark stood side by side, looking out at the world they had built together. "This is just the beginning, Eleanor," Mark said, his voice full of hope. "The best is yet to come." Eleanor smiled, her heart full of gratitude and love. "I believe that," she said softly, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it together, hand in hand. Stay tuned to see what new adventures await Eleanor and Mark as they continue to build their life, their love, and their future together.